systems nominated.
Hello and welcome to today's Battletech review. Today we're going to be looking at the Wendigo, which is a pretty decent mech in its category, but I wouldn't say it's the top of the line here. And I would say that it's in a very particular category because it's not the only mech in its name and its naming scheme. It's quite weird for an OmniMech to have variants, and this one has 2 extra variants of the base model. And even there, I wouldn't say it's the base model because, well, the model that's been the most produced is not the one that was originally produced, which is completely out of whack when looking at OmniMechs. It is also a derivative of the Avalanche, which basically means it's an OmniMech that is upgraded on an OmniMech, so we're looking at a variant that add variants, so it is completely different than most machines. So let's get a look at this one. I personally try to market these things as a big win whenever I can because I have a few of those things, a handful of these things laying around that is pretty hard to sell. Literally, this is a clan-graded Omni that you just can't sell to clanners, mercenaries, house forces, or even junkyard fighters every once in a while. The Wendigo is just one of those things that suffers from bad customer experience and bad product reviews. It's not terrible on its own, but it's just the way it was used and what happened with it. People are not really sold on the design. You also have the fact that the pilots are generally called the Wendigoons because of the way that they were basically trying to goon around there, trying to bully other people in other smaller mechs. So it really doesn't have a super good reputation. So the Wendigo is an evolution of the previous Lucian armor work OmniMech that came out in the 3130s, which was the Avalanche. It basically uses the same chassis and the same basic setup, but I mean, the Avalanche was a middling OmniMech. It was a middling medium at that, which means that, well, you had quite a few different things that you could replace it, and it was supposed to replenish the forces of Clan Novacat, but honestly, it didn't fit the bill of what they needed it to do. Thankfully, the Clan Novacat scientist cast did understand how they were built and understand still how to build OmniMech, so they started using their own gadgetry and extrapolation in order to make the little thing a little bit better. One of the problems was that the Novacats barely could build tractor trailers at that point, let alone full battle mechs without any external help. Even the factories that they did have basically were running on parts purchased from everybody else. Clan Seafox did show up to help them with the Wendigo, and they said, sure, we'll help you build a new OmniMech, but you have to do a few little things for us. Basically, Clan Seafox wanted to test all sorts of things, and, well, the Novacats were the best people for that. They first wanted to test laser reflective armor and a torso-mounted cockpit, so the Novacats just went yes boss, sure boss, and started molding their Wendigos with these particular specs. So you have the first wave of Wendigos, which started walking off the lines in 3134, which featured 23.5 tons of pod space on a 50-ton chassis, which is quite reasonable if you ask me. It's almost half the weight of the machine. You also couple this with a top speed of 86 km per hour using a 250 XL engine and 9.5 tons of reflective plates, which is quite good unless you get into fist fights, and, well, you shouldn't be getting into fist fights with a mech without fists, so the Wendigo was fine on that end. To make room for all of that, well, you've got that Clan XL engine, which is better than an Inner Sphere one in many ways, and the good Clan Endo steel that the Novacats were still producing. You save a whole chunk of weight, but you do take up a little bit of your inner volume, so you won't be able to put in as much things, but with 23.5 tons of equipment, you might not be filling up everything. The problem with these particular designs and prototypes were that they were basically running on a toaster oven operating system with a targeting system that could barely use the weapons that you set on them, so you basically had to pre-program things on the original one, and a comm system that would probably be replaced by semaphores and be probably more reliable. You had 4 jump jets that allowed you to jump 120 meters at a time when they actually worked, and that required the computer to actually be able to manage that. once all of those kinks are worked out, these prototypes are still quite good. The problem is the early batch of them all had these little issues coming on. It was heavily armed for a 50-ton mech, though. You had an LB-10X autocannon with 2 tons of reloads, which is pretty darn good. And an ERPPC, which gives you very good range and good firepower for a 50-ton mech. Well, I mean, clan mechs can usually mount ERPPCs fairly easily, but on a 50-ton mech in that particular era, in that particular region of space, it was quite good. Backing this up was a pair of medium pulse lasers and a single ER small laser, so you had a little bit of a close range punch as well, and it was quite accurate. The weaponry on it was quite good. The problem really came from the early customer experience with what computer was running it. While things didn't quite work out on that prime prototype there's also an alpha configuration that was available during that particular production run, as it was sent to die on the Republican front by the Aus Kurita and what was left of the Nova Cats. This one features 8 improved jump jets that the Seafox wanted to test out once again, giving it a jump range of about 240 meters, which is quite decent. The primary weapons is a pair of ER large laser, which is pretty darn good. It's going to give you that range that you would want. And at closer range, well, you have 3 AP Gauss rifle in order to take out infantry and give you a little bit more punch. You have a targeting computer as well to round things up and give you pretty good accuracy overall. This was pretty good as long as the operating system and the computers in those things actually worked. Strangely, Clan Nova Cat was not super satisfied with what was going on. Really, they were the butt of 2 particular jokes, one from the Combine with the Avalanche and one from the Seafox with that new Wendigo. And the Clan Nova Cat started to be a little bit resentful. I really wonder why, especially seeing how they were basically just being the butt of everybody's jokes at that point. In 3135, they started building the Wendigo to their own specification, and hopefully that one would be a little bit better for them. So the second time was the charmier, at least the charming enough. The basics were already there, and that's what they kept using. A torso-mounted cockpit on a brawler or a semi-brawler mech is not the smartest thing ever, but they already had the chassis and they already had the setup made with endo steel and reflective plates, so they didn't want to change that because that would have been expensive and quite time-consuming. The engine was replaced, though, with a consolidated 300 XL, giving you a top speed of 97 kilometers per hour, which is quite significant. And you get 12 built-in double heat sinks to give you a better heat exchange system overall. It does invest more in mobility, but not too much. And for a 50-ton mech, a top speed of 97, 96 kilometers per hour, around that range, is quite reasonable, especially in this day and age. You had 19.5 tons of pod space, which is not terrible. And it's 3.5 tons more than the Avalanche. So you've got less than the original prototype Wendigo, but more than the Avalanche that preceded it. So I don't think it's a bad thing overall. So what did they put on the Prime configuration the second time around? Were they smarter about it? Well, to be honest, not really. You start with an Ultra AC2 as your primary weapon, which is not a very smart thing to do. Then again, you have to look at the Prime configuration of the previous big 50-ton OmniMech from Clan Nova Cat with the Huntsman, and it also packs an Ultra AC2. It's very good against tanks, and it's very good against those long-range units there that can be easily crippled with a single shot. If you're shooting at another mech, it's not going to be all that great. The Ed mounts a 10 rack of LRMs because, well, you've got the room for it since the cockpit is in the torso, meaning that you will be able to fight at a decent range for a long enough time. At closer range, well, that's where things are very, very good. You get a quartet of ER medium lasers, that's 4 inner sphere large laser on a 40-ton mech that is going to also be a little bit more heat efficient. And you have a Streak 6 tube of SRM in order to blow up tanks, and it criticals in the internals of somebody else, where you strip the armor with your previous weapons. Of course, the Ultra AC2 is not going to do much of that, but the ER medium lasers is going to melt the armor fairly quickly. So this is a decent all-rounder. It's going to be able to do quite a few things at a decent enough speed. So overall, yes, this is a better design than the original Wendigo VP or virtual prototype, and probably better than some of the other 50-tonners out there. Alpha configuration, on the other hand, is a brilliant and fairly simple setup. Each arm now mounts a large pulse laser. Really, I would put ANDs on there if I could, because, well, there's room for it, and the large pulse laser doesn't prevent you from putting ANDs on it. So, I mean, I can build that for you if you need it, but once again, it's going to be good at picking up things and helping out around the base, but you wouldn't want to get into fist fight with a thing with reflective plates. So, maybe having ANDs would be a useless in this case. The end now packs a 15 rack of LRM, giving you fairly good long-range support, or you can just blast someone in the face because, well, it's a clan LRM, so it doesn't really have any minimum range. You have a decent ammo load with an extra 2 tons there for the LRMs, and you've got 2 extra heat sinks for good measure in order to compensate for, well, how much heat the large pulse lasers are going to do. This is basically a clan brawler. I mean, there's no other way around it. It's going to be pretty accurate. It's fast enough. It's got the range. It's not going to be able to compete with larger mech, but it's going to be able to compete with other mediums. And since Alpha configuration was decently smart, they kind of messed with it in Bravo configuration. You start with 8 improved jump jets because apparently they needed that thing to fly, on top of being pretty fast on its feet. For weapons, you've got a suite of 4 ER medium laser and 6 ER small laser, meaning that you will be able to kill things very quickly at closer range, but it's one of those cases where maybe pulse lasers would have been a little bit better, at least for the ER small lasers. Replace them with micro pulse lasers. I'm not sure if they have access to them, though. It's an odd kind of situation here, but I mean, it gives you a whole lot of punch, at least. And finally, you stick a Guardian ECM system on there, so you are able to deal with the Curetans that you know you're going to have to fight pretty soon, because things are going south for everybody. Decently enough there, you're going to be able to take out C3 networks, you're going to be able to take out all sorts of other fancy electronics with that ECM. So it's not a bad idea, and you're fast enough to be able to get into position for the ECM to work. You get 4 extra double heat sinks as well in order to compensate for the extra heat from the lasers and the improved jump jets. Personally, I would probably have gone with just regular jump jet and tighten up the different weapons on there, maybe put some more pulses on there, but it's still, I mean, it's a thing that existed and that could be useful. Charlie configuration probably identifies as an hotel configuration, but I'm not the one who makes the choices here. It just came out this way. Honestly, if you were this 60 years, 80 years in the past, it would have come out as an hotel configuration, but torso-mounted cockpits and laser reflective plates didn't exist back then, so it wouldn't have existed. You know what I mean there. The main weapon is arguably the improved heavy large laser that is on one side, backed by a streak 15 tubes of LRMs on the other side. You're going to get pretty darn good range on the missiles and a very good clustering since they are streak, but you do lose a little bit on the indirect fire capabilities. The improved heavy large laser basically is one of the most damaging weapon out there. It's got a decent range as well, but not quite as good as most clan weapons, and it does generate tons of heat. On the head, well, you've got a pair of improved heavy medium lasers as well, giving you even more punch once things get close by, and you get 3 extra double heat sinks that kind of try to cope with the heat. In order to be able to bring all those heavy lasers into range, you also have a supercharger on that thing, giving you a top range of a... And so the Sea Fox have the last laugh after that, because the Curetan decided to exterminate Clan Novacat for siding with the wrong Cureta during their own little civil war. This was probably an excuse, really, to be honest, once you look at what Matsuhari Toranaga has been doing and has been saying over the years. He probably wanted them gone from day one, and the territory reclaimed for the glory of House Cureta, and, for his own glory. The factory building the Wendigo was heavily damaged in the fighting and is barely functional still at this point in time, and I doubt they can build a whole lot of things as fancy as the Wendigo, or not in large amounts. But Clan Sea Fox did strike a deal with Clan Wolf after the Battle of Terra, and they recovered a whole bunch of those prototype Wendigos that had been sent to fight the Republic of the Sphere by the Curetans because they wanted to get rid of them. So Clan Seafox got what they wanted because they got all those test beds that the Nova Cats were meant to use for them, and they started sticking even more experimental tech into it so they could test even more things that they could try to sell later on. A whole lot of those things came from the Republic Institute of Strategic Combat, or RISC, which was starting to build a whole bunch of new technology for the Republic, but most of them went between nowhere and not very far. The base setup is still the same as the prototype VP Wendigo, with a 250XL engine, endo steel, and mirror plates, so that part is still about the same. Where things change is that the myomer is now super cooled, which basically means, well, normally when you run your engine and you start moving the myomer, things get eaten up and, well, you generate a tiny little bit of heat. Super cool myomer allows you to eliminate that extra heat. Is it worth it? Well, not in my book, but if you improved on the process and got things improved even more, maybe at some point it might be worth it. This one also has an emergency coolant system, and that's where things get a little bit fancy. I know the Seafox are trying to do that super cool myomer because they are trying to sell people XXL engines, but I mean, if the price of a mech starts reaching the price of a dropship, you might not want to buy it for some reason. What you've got left on the machine is 22.5 ton of pod space and not much internal room because you do use it for that super cool myomer, that endo steel, that XL engine, so you do have to play with what you have. So the third prime version of the Wendigo, you can tell me when it starts being confusing here because it's also the fourth Avalanche prime version in a way, now mounts a ProtoMech AC2. We probably should have gone with an Inner Sphere Light AC2. They're generally better for what they do. And you also have that LRM-10 mounted in the head with a single ton of reload because the other one is replaced with a recon camera. Don't ask me why. They probably needed to test the recon camera. I probably would just strip that out, add back ammo, or probably more likely an active probe, which is more useful than a recon camera in my book. You still have 4 ER medium laser and a Streak 6 tube of SRMs, making you perfectly reasonable for brawling. But wait, there's more! Those ER medium lasers are now tied to an experimental pulse laser module, turning them into, well, ER pulse lasers. But they're better than the Clan Wolf ER pulse lasers because, well, they're still more accurate, but they generate more heat. It's kind of an odd situation, and, well, it's probably that the people at Clan Seafox wanted to test that technology because they probably want to stick it on something other than ER lasers, namely heavy lasers. So in the end, you've got 3 different prime configurations on 3 different OmniMechs that share a single chassis. But wait, there's more! The Clan Wolf Stormwolf that just came out a few years back here also uses the same chassis with alterations. All of those are bases off the Avalanche. So you've got the Avalanche, of course, and then the Wendigo prototypes, which are basically the Avalanche 1.5. With the Wendigo, the Seafox are using right now being the 1.5.5. The official Wendigo is the Avalanche 2, and the Stormwolf is the Wendigo 2. Tell me if it gets confusing there. Which one will rip in this particular rat race and become the standard? Well, out of all of those mechs, there's only one that's still in production, and it's the Stormwolf. So it's probably the one that will be still around by the end of the century. But who knows? Maybe the Wendigo will come back and replace some of the other 50-tonners out there. It's really hard to know, and who knows? Maybe there'll be a Wendigo 2 Part 2 Mark 5. In the end, this is really a case of we need to see where this is going to go. So I thank everybody for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a nice rest of your day, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.